Taiwan. I'm Yvonne with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. We begin with the latest over the deadly capsizing of a Chinese fishing boat near Taiwan's Kinmen Islands. 3 weeks on, the case is still unresolved, and family members of 2 Chinese fishers that died are calling for Taiwanese authorities to take responsibility. Tiffany Wang has more.
Praying for their loved ones' souls. These families from China are in Taiwan's outlying Kinmen Islands to say goodbye to their deceased relatives. They were among 4 Chinese fishers on board a vessel that overturned when it encountered Taiwan's Coast Guard 3 weeks ago. The incident is being investigated, and the Coast Guard maintain they are not to blame for the Chinese boat capsizing. But the families of the 2 Chinese fishers that died disagree with that version of the story.
船明明是被装翻的，没有人来承担责任，连一句最简单的道歉都没有，我们心里很难过。
These family members of the deceased came to Kinmen 2 weeks ago to identify the bodies and speak with prosecutors, who have been unable to determine who is at fault for their deaths. The Coast Guard, which says the Chinese speedboat overturned while escaping inspection, offered condolence money, but the families refused.
我们就是各给10万块，
跟原本谈的抚恤金是不一样，
不一样，这纯粹是我们对家属的一个抚慰的一个心意而已。就是希望说透过红卫来转交。
It's been nearly a month since the 2 fishers died, aggravating tensions in the Taiwan Strait. China claims Taiwan as its own, and there have been no official talks between the 2 sides for years, as Beijing refuses to speak with Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party. And now, Chinese representatives from the Quanzhou Taiwan Affairs Office are blaming Taiwan's ruling DPP for the lack of closure.
台湾方面参加协商的人员已于3月3日离开金门，至今没有返回，毫无音信，充分表明民进党当局没有解决问题的诚意，由此造成的后果由民进党当局负责。
But Taiwanese officials say they want to continue dialogue with Chinese representatives to resolve tensions in the strait.
倒没有所谓破局啦，我想有进展的，也有没有进展的嘛。双方应该各自回去检讨一下，请示一下。
But without an agreement on what occurred with the Chinese fishing vessel in the strait, responsibility and reparations for the incident seem far away, leaving the families of the deceased still searching for answers. Alex Chen and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's labor minister has apologized for a remark about Indian migrant workers some say was racist. John Van Trieste has this report.
Labor Minister Xu Ming-chun appears at Taiwan's legislature. Lawmakers want an explanation. In a recent interview, Xu said Taiwan's plan to bring in Indian migrant workers will be limited to those from northeastern India. Her reasoning sparked accusations of racism.
不管在肤色、饮食习惯，都跟我们比较相近。然后不管在这个制造、营造或农业方面，都是他们擅长的强项。
Taiwan's foreign ministry has apologized for what it called Xu's inappropriate language and said that Taiwan will welcome Indian workers of any background as long as they meet job requirements. But that hasn't quelled anger, including among lawmakers. Huang Ren, an indigenous Taiwanese lawmaker who represents an indigenous constituency, had this to say.
肤色不同，就是潜在的内心里面就已有歧视的。
But the labor minister says there was no racist intent behind what she said.
我真的没有任何歧视的意思，其实我是肯定。 印度移工他们的素质跟工作能力的表现，或许发言不够精准，有造成外界的误解。这个部分我会来检讨哦。那我昨天也对这样的一个造成一个纷扰误解，我也表达歉意。
Whatever her intentions, advocates for migrant workers in Taiwan say her choice of words reflects racist attitudes that do exist in Taiwan society, and that racism is a problem migrant workers in Taiwan do face.
有部分台湾民众可能会去认同这件事情，因为就说。 刚刚有说到，就是有些观念上的歧视啊，或观念上的一些文化差异、肤色差异、语言差异，还是会让台湾人造成一些刻板印象。
It's unclear how the labor minister's apology will go down in India, a country the government has worked to draw closer to as it works to boost relations with Taiwan's southern neighbors. But it puts plans to open up a new source of imported labor on an awkward footing before they are even finalized. Luffy Li and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Health authorities have identified 2 new measles cases in New Taipei. The new cases crossed paths with the previously identified patients and later developed symptoms like rash, fever, and fatigue. 6 cases have now been recorded this year, the most in 4 years. Health officials say the outbreak should peak before April. The government is working on getting health workers vaccinated. Authorities are urging people in northern Taiwan to remain on high alert, as measles is highly contagious and has a long incubation period.
只要说有带源者的遗迹呢出现在公共场合的话，其实都可以造成人群的传播。那麻疹的受感染者基本上潜伏期呢中位数是13天，那最长可以到18天，在之后呢它就会出现有发烧以及有皮疹的这样的情况。那甚至呢，在口腔里面会出现一些典型的白点。
7 people have been indicted for falsifying signatures on the petition supporting Foxconn founder Terry Go's presidential bid last year. Prosecutors say the suspects were contacted through the messaging platform Telegram. They were told to obtain national identification numbers which were used to sign Go's petition. The suspects were then paid with cryptocurrencies. The case was brought in response to reports of identity theft and is only one part of a much larger signature buying scandal. Taiwan's defense military says it's monitoring a U.S. warship that transited the Taiwan Strait on Tuesday. The USS John Vance sailed northwards toward Japan in what the U.S. Navy says is a routine freedom of navigation exercise. Transits by warships from the U.S. and its allies through the Taiwan Strait often anger Beijing, which views both the waters and Taiwan as part of its own territory. It's the second time a U.S. warship has transited the Taiwan Strait this year. This recent Taiwan Strait transit comes just a day after China announced it will increase military spending by 7%. But are the two events linked? To find out, our reporter Jaime Ocon spoke to Brian Hart, a security analyst with the China Power Project at CSIS in Washington, D.C.
Brian, I want to first ask you about this transit in the Taiwan Strait by the U.S. Is this transit timed in any way with the 2 sessions meeting that's happening right now in Beijing?
Yeah, so I think broadly this transit, these are the U.S. Navy describes these as routine. I believe this is the second one that's happened this year. And, generally sometimes these are in response to specific things. I think right now it's probably not a response to anything that's going on in Beijing with the 2 sessions. I think it's in response to China's assertiveness around Kinmen in recent weeks in response, their Coast Guard sailing in waters around Kinmen after the death of 2 Chinese fishermen. So I think that's largely in response to this.
At this summit, this 2-session summit, China announced it's going to be increasing defense spending by 7%. Is that a lot? And what does that mean for Taiwan's military?
The figure that they put out was 7.2% growth. And that's pretty much exactly in line with what we saw last year as the official growth rate and pretty much in line with what we've seen in the last several years of growth rates around the high single figures. And so I think, for me, this just shows continued steady investment in the PLA, which is significant, I think, given some of the economic constraints China's on in terms of, slowing GDP, but also, sluggish housing market and all the various other structural factors China's facing. So I think it shows that there's continued prioritization of the PLA with Xi Jinping caring about military modernization. I expect we'll continue to see that. One of the signs I look for is, if China faces a really prolonged and sharp economic slowdown, more severe than what we're seeing now, you may see more of that kind of guns versus butter debate in terms of how they invest. We're not seeing that yet. We're seeing them continue to, prioritize pretty steady investment.
Given this increase in defense spending from China, what does this mean for Taiwan and the other countries in the Indo-Pacific region?
This is just another year of continuing shifts in the balance of power. China now outspends Taiwan and all of its other neighbors by a huge margin. Last we looked, the best, I think, kind of figure we have is that China spends more than the next 17 countries in the region combined. Still less than the United States, but significantly more than all of its neighbors. And so I think that's a worrying sign for Taiwan, but also for Japan and Korea and India. countries that have tense relations with Beijing. And we do see these countries starting to invest more in their own defense and to start investing in some of their alliances with the United States and other partners in the region in response to Beijing's growing power.
That was Jaime Ocon speaking to Brian Hart, a security analyst with the China Power Project in Washington, D.C. 9 Southeast Asian leaders have joined hundreds of diplomats, academics, and officials in Melbourne for the ASEAN-Australia Special Summit 2024 as Canberra looks to expand its influence in the region. Rosie Greninger reports.
Leaders of Southeast Asian countries holding hands in a show of solidarity as members of the ASEAN bloc of nations meet in Australia. It's the third day of the summit where Southeast Asian powers are discussing maintaining peace and prosperity in the region. Today, host Australia has made its support clear, saying building connections with Southeast Asia is key to the nation's future.
Australia is fully committed to cooperating with you within the framework of ASEAN and through crucial bodies like the East Asia Summit and APEC. I hope that you leave Australia with a deeper understanding of Australia's commitment to our region and our optimism for its future. Our understanding that more than any other part of the world, Southeast Asia is where Australia's destiny lies.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese yesterday unveiling an economic program worth more than $1.3 billion, encouraging more investment in Asia and bringing more jobs to Australia. And today announcing more than $40 million to bolster educational links with the region. Trade and investment are a major focus on this week's special summit in Melbourne, held to mark 50 years since Australia became ASEAN's first dialogue partner. But more contentious issues, including tensions in the South China Sea, also loom large. A flare-up of those tensions seen yesterday, when Chinese Coast Guard carrying out dangerous manoeuvres led to a collision with a Philippine ship. China also using water cannons to smash through the front window of the Philippines Coast Guard vessel. That's drawn strong condemnation from Australia, the US, members of the EU and the Philippines. But some leaders have played down the situation, saying it can be managed and outside countries should not weigh in.
The positions we take on those claims are different depending on where we stand, and Singapore takes no position on the claims, but we have a strong view on international law and on freedom of navigation, which we have stated many times. You can look it up, and it has not changed.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese today met privately with ASEAN members before leaders attended a retreat in Melbourne's Government House. Although ASEAN nations maintain varying positions, the summit will end with a joint statement on behalf of all countries involved, expected to address territorial disputes in the South China Sea and the conflict in Gaza. Devon Tsai and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
Doctors in Japan say they've carried out the world's first double organ transplant using living donors. Kyoto University Hospital says it transplanted parts of the lungs and liver to a 10-year-old boy taken from multiple family members last November. The operation involved 4 operating rooms and took 18 hours. The boy was discharged from the hospital last week after he could walk again on his own. Organ donors have also safely returned home. Marine authorities have identified one more critically endangered Taiwanese white dolphin. The Ocean Affairs Council says a young adult dolphin was one of 29 Taiwanese white dolphins that were sighted last year out of an estimated population of 50. Taiwanese white dolphins live in shallow waters within 5 kilometers off the shore. This means they often get tangled up in fishing gear and are affected by coastal pollution. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. If you like what you saw, you can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media. Finally, before we go, check out these horses from the Arabian horse competition in Libya. I'm Yvonne Yang. Take care, and I'll see you next time.